A dynasty's secret ripped open on live TV. Jasmine Crockett unleashes a bombshell. Melania Trump put Barron Trump's name on secret trust funds worth millions. A son turned into a shield, a mother caught in betrayal, and a dynasty on the edge. The chamber shook, the world gasped. Can the Trump empire survive after the truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Capitol burned under blinding lights, every camera pointed at the hearing room, broadcasting live to millions of Americans. This wasn't routine politics. This was a trial of power, money, and betrayal. The air was sharp, thick with tension, like a fuse waiting to ignite. At the center, Jasmine Crockett sat with a heavy stack of documents, her eyes locked forward, steady and cold. She wasn't just a congresswoman, she looked like a prosecutor ready to strike. Across from her sat Barron Trump, the silent air-face, rigid, avoiding eye contact, knowing his name was about to be dragged into fire. Behind him, Melania Trump appeared flawless and untouchable, yet her silence screamed louder than any denial. The banner declared investigation into trusts and hidden assets of the Trump family. A trust, supposedly a tool to protect wealth, can also become a weapon. Legal on paper, but when twisted, it shields billions from America's tax authority. Tonight, America would learn whose name had been used as that shield. The chamber was already tense when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. The person who placed Barron's name into the trust was not Donald Trump. It was Melania Trump. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then the impact landed. Senators jolted upright, reporters scrambled, and the gallery gasped as if the marble walls themselves had cracked. All eyes turned to Barron. He shot up from his chair, slamming his hand against the wooden table so hard the microphones rattled. His face burned red, his voice broke into the silence like thunder. "No way, my mother would never do that." The force of his words echoed, but Jasmine did not flinch. Her hand reached calmly into the thick folder and slid a sheet across to the clerk. The air grew heavier with every second as the document made its way to the projector. The screen behind them flickered, and suddenly the facts filled the room. Bold letters, crisp lines unmistakable. A signature sprawled at the bottom, M. Trump. The date glared back at everyone, January 12, 2021, the final days before Donald Trump left the White House. A perfect storm of timing and intent. Gas spread through the chamber like a contagion. Reporters raised their cameras' shutters, firing in a staccato rhythm, while senators leaned toward each other, whispering furiously. Barron's hands clenched into fists, his voice ragged but loud enough to pierce through the chaos. "This is fake. It has to be fake." His denial rang hollow against the glowing signature. Jasmine turned her gaze directly at him, her tone calm but cutting. "This document was not created by me. It came directly from your family's law office." The words struck like a gavel. The room tilted, the gallery shifting between disbelief and dawning horror. Behind Barron, Melania sat perfectly still. Her face remained composed, but the cameras caught the truth her posture betrayed. One close-up revealed the tremor in her hand, resting on her lap, fingers twitching against the fabric of her dress. That single image, replayed on live television, told more than any denial ever could. It was the portrait of a woman caught in a trap of her own making. Barron, desperate for reassurance, glanced back at her, but no answer came. Jasmine seized the silence, her voice rising not just to the chamber, but to the millions watching at home. When the name of an adult is placed into a trust without their knowledge, that name becomes a legal shield. Money can move behind it untouched, while the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, America's tax authority, hesitates to investigate. Why? Because the beneficiary looks clean. No scandals, no history, just a spotless cover. That is why Barron's name became the perfect financial shield. The words detonated like explosives. This was no longer a political squabble. It was a financial scandal unraveling in real time. Senators pounded the table, journalists shouted over one another, the audience buzzed in disbelief. The chamber was no longer a courtroom. It was a battlefield where loyalty, family, and billions of dollars collided. And in that instant, the first explosion of the night had gone off. The uproar from the projected signature had barely settled when Barron shot back, his voice cracking but fierce. "This is nothing but humiliation. She's dragging a child into politics, using me as a weapon to smear my family." His words rang through the chamber, laced with desperation. He slammed his palm against the table, trying to reclaim control, trying to sound older, stronger, but his voice betrayed the tremor of fear. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of his expression, every bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. The audience leaned in, some whispering, others shaking their heads. A Republican senator seized the moment, rising to add fuel. "This is unethical," he shouted, pointing across the room. "Dragging a young man into partisan warfare is beneath this chamber. Congress should never allow children to be turned into political pawns." Applause broke out from a section of the gallery, echoing off the marble. The defense was loud, theatrical, designed to frame Barron as an innocent caught in a ruthless game. The senator's voice boomed with moral outrage, as though he were shielding a boy from cruelty. For a second, the momentum swung toward Barron, painting him as the victim. But Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her tone cool, deliberate, slicing through the noise like a blade. "He is 20 years old. He is an adult. And if his name is being used to conceal tens of millions of dollars, then this is no longer a private matter." Her words hit like hammer blows, each syllable measured, undeniable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The chamber quieted under the weight of her logic. Viewers at home saw it too, the raw, brutal truth that stripped away the veneer of innocence. The Republican senator slumped back, lips pressed tight, unable to counter. Barron's hands trembled beneath the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. Anger boiled inside him, twisting with fear. He could not produce evidence to prove his innocence. No document, no signature, no denial strong enough to erase what had just been revealed. His eyes darted back toward the gallery, locking on Melania. Surely she would stand, surely she would deny this. Surely she would save him. But she sat still, her face carved from stone lips. Sealed eyes forward. The cameras caught her silence, and in living rooms across America, millions saw what Barron saw: no rescue, no denial, only cold stillness. The realization hit him like a blade. The silence of the one person he trusted most felt heavier than any accusation. Betrayal seeped in, though a flicker of hope clung stubbornly in his chest. Maybe she was waiting for the right moment. Maybe she would rise, defend him, tell the world this was all wrong. He wanted to believe that, needed to believe that. And so he sat trembling, burning with rage and doubt, holding on to the fragile hope that his mother's voice would still come to save him. The silence around Melania's motionless figure was suffocating when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp. "I will now call a witness," she said, eyes sweeping across the room. The doors at the side opened, and a man in his late 40s stepped in, his expression carved with tension. The clerk read his name aloud: Daniel Whitaker, former White House aide, who had once worked directly inside Melania Trump's East Wing office. All cameras swung toward him as he raised his right hand to swear in. The tension in the chamber thickened. This was no rumor, no document. This was flesh and blood, a man who had been there. Whitaker took his seat, the microphone trembling slightly as he adjusted it. The chair creaked under the silence of 1,000 held breaths. Jasmine gestured calmly. "Mr. Whitaker, please tell this chamber what you witnessed." His throat tightened, eyes flicking once toward Melania, then back to Jasmine. "I saw it with my own eyes," he began. "I saw Mrs. Melania Trump sign the document that placed Barron Trump's name into the trust." The words detonated. Gasps rolled through the chamber like a wave crashing against stone. Whitaker pressed on, his voice steadier now. She was clear about why. She said it was the only way to protect the assets from the lawsuit by the New York Attorney General. At once, the room erupted. Senators turned to each other, reporters screamed questions, and the gallery buzzed in disbelief. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was anchored to a real investigation. Everyone remembered 2021 when Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, launched her probe into Donald Trump for financial fraud. The dots connected instantly. This was bigger than family secrets. This was a shield against the law itself. Barron froze, his jaw, slack eyes wide, as though the ground had given way beneath him. Sweat trickled down his temple, catching the light of the cameras. He whispered to himself, barely audible, but caught by a nearby microphone. No, this can't be true." The boy who had tried so hard to stay invisible was suddenly a name tied to scandal, dragged into the storm by the very person he trusted most. The weight of betrayal pressed heavy on his shoulders, visible to everyone watching. Jasmine's gaze stayed fixed on Barron, her voice softer now, almost compassionate. Sometimes the people closest to us make us into tools, but justice will not allow anyone to be used forever. Her words landed not just on Barron, but across the entire chamber, resonating with millions watching at home. The tension snapped into chaos, shouts, cameras, and a swell of disbelief. Whitaker's testimony had shifted the ground beneath the entire hearing. This was the second explosion of the night, a blast that turned suspicion into confirmation, doubt into undeniable fact. The chamber had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The room still rang with the echo of Daniel Whitaker's testimony when Barron suddenly leaned forward, his voice cracking with desperation. His palms slammed against the table, his eyes burning toward the gallery. "Mother, please tell them this isn't true. I believe you." The plea cut through the noise, raw and unpolished, not the words of a man in control, but of a son begging for protection. The camera zoomed in, capturing the trembling in his hands, the panic in his voice. The entire chamber turned as one to Melania Trump, waiting for her reply. She lowered her gaze, lashes falling like a curtain, her face unreadable. Her right hand moved slowly, fingers twisting around her wedding band, squeezing it tight as if it were the only anchor she had. But no words left her lips. The silence pressed into the chamber, heavier than stone, swallowing Barron's cry whole. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like thunder in the tense air. Millions of viewers watching at home leaned forward, waiting for her voice, and got nothing. A Democratic senator rose, his voice sharp, echoing across the room. "Mrs. Trump, will you please confirm or deny this signature? Did you sign your son's name into the trust?" The demand was plain, the kind of yes or no question that begged for clarity. But Melania did not lift her head. Her silence stretched the pause, growing unbearable. Every second dragged like an eternity, the weight of non-answers amplifying the tension. The senator's words hung unanswered, and the silence became the story. Barron snapped. His voice ripped through the air, louder, angrier, almost shaking with disbelief. "Say it, Mother. Tell them you never betrayed me." His cry cracked under the strain, the anguish of a son torn between loyalty and terror. His body leaned forward as though sheer force could pull the truth from her. But Melania did not move. The cameras caught every detail, her lips pressed together, her eyes still downcast, her hands still locked on the ring. The stillness was louder than the shouts. That was when Jasmine Crockett spoke, her tone, calm yet merciless, slicing through the emotional chaos. Sometimes silence is louder than any scream, and sometimes silence is a confession. Her words echoed like a verdict reverberating off the marble walls. The reporters seized on the line instantly, knowing history had just been written. Across social media, headlines began to flash, "Melania's silence shakes the nation." What the country had just witnessed was not an answer, but the absence of one. And that absence carried more weight than any denial. The chamber seemed to collapse into a suffocating stillness. Every face was turned toward Melania, every heartbeat loud in the hush. It wasn't just a mother refusing to speak. It was a moment where silence itself became evidence, a weapon sharper than any document. And the nation felt the tremor. The silence hung like a noose, and then it broke. Melania rose slowly from her seat, every movement deliberate, every eye locked on her. Camera lights flared, lenses snapped into focus, and the chamber tilted toward her as if pulled by gravity. She stood tall but looked fragile, a statue learning to breathe. Even the air seemed to pause, waiting for the words that would decide the night. Every microphone leaned closer, hungry for the truth. Her voice wavered, but it carried through the room and across the broadcast without missing a beat. "I signed it. I did it to protect my son, not to hurt him." The sentence hit like a hammer, simple and final. The hush cracked into a low collective gasp, as if the marble itself exhaled. It was not a rumor, not a theory, not a spin, it was a confession. In living rooms across America, people froze, fingers hovering over remotes, replaying the words in their heads. Barron collapsed back into his chair, the fight draining from his shoulders. His face fell open in despair, eyes wet, lips trembling, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He stared at the floor, searching for a version of the world where that sentence had never been spoken. Around him, reporters sprang to their feet, shouting into phones, waving to camera crews. Chirons blazed on screens. Melania Trump admits signing controversial trust. The clatter of keyboards and the metallic chatter of shutters rolled through the chamber like hail. Jasmine did not smile and did not gloat. She lifted the microphone and spoke in an even measured tone. Protecting your son means keeping him out of the storm. Turning his name into a financial shield is not protection. The line landed like a verdict, calm, clear, and devastating. Barron's eyes flicked to Jasmine, then back to his mother as if choosing which truth to accept. The senators stared in the stunned silence, the moral math suddenly simple. This was the third detonation of the night, a climax both tragic and seismic. The committee chair pounded the gavel for order, but the sound vanished under the flood of voices. Producers in the press row barked into headsets calling for split screens, slow-motion replays, and instant subtitles. Phones lit up like a field of stars as staffers texted frantic updates to bosses across Washington. Some in the gallery covered their mouths. Others simply stared, stunned by the bluntness of the admission. No one could pretend anymore. Melania remained standing, shoulders tight, eyes glassy, a person suspended between certainty and regret. She did not elaborate, did not retract, did not offer a single excuse. Her hands folded at her waist, the wedding band flashing beneath the lights. Barron wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to steady his breath and failing. Jasmine's papers lay motionless before her proof, no longer needing performance. In that breathless stillness, the story rewrote itself in real time, and the chamber felt the rewrite hit now. Before the room could catch its breath from the confession, the clerk stepped forward with one more item. The seal on a small evidence pouch cracked open, and a labeled flash drive slid into the record. The committee has received new evidence, an audio recording of a conversation between Mrs. Melania Trump and the family's attorney, the clerk announced, voice clipped and formal. Technicians hurried to the console, patching the file into the chamber's sound system. A waveform pulsed across the monitors. The gallery hushed to a perfect brittle quiet. Every camera light sharpened, every pen hovered, waiting for the first word. A hiss of static, a brief rustle, and then her timbre, steady, unmistakable, intimate, and cold. Melania's voice filled the chamber, clear as crystal, without echo or doubt. If we use his name, Barron Trump, the IRS will not dare to touch it. The sentence hung in the air like a blade, bright and lethal. Gasps rolled through the rows, hands flew to mouths, and shudders erupted in a machine gun stutter. On the broadcast, Quran producers typed the words in real time. Living rooms across America read them as they were spoken. Silence dropped like a curtain, and in that silence, the meaning screamed. There was no wiggle, no lawyerly hedge, no softening clause, only intent and method. She had acknowledged a tactic, placed the son's name on the vault, and dared the nation's tax authority to break the seal. Faces drained, spines stiffened, and even the senators who had barked earlier now stared at the floor. It was no longer rumor or inference. It was an instruction captured on tape. The room understood it together, a single collective flinch of recognition. Barron's breath hitched loud in his own microphone, and his composure shattered. Tears broke free, hot and furious, cutting tracks down his cheeks as he grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. He shook his head, a small, helpless motion, whispering, "No. Please no," at the wood grain. Rage flickered in his eyes, wrestling with grief, as if two storms had met and devoured the sky. He stared toward the gallery, toward the figure he had always believed would shield him, and the belief bled out of his face. Melania's eyes glazed and overflowed, a single tear falling. Then another, but the tape kept playing, indifferent to regret. She pressed her lips together, shoulders trembling once, and lifted a hand to her cheek, too late to stop the damage already done. The chamber didn't speak. It didn't need to. The evidence had drawn its own conclusion, clean and merciless. Barron was no longer the quiet branch on a loud family tree. He was the mechanism, the cover, the signature on the lock. And that was the key detail of the night. Barron had been turned into a living shield, not a bystander, but the center pin of a financial design. The shock inside the chamber didn't stay contained. It detonated across the world within minutes. CNN flashed a red banner, "Melania admits signing trust." Audio mentions IRS. BBC cut to a live special, the presenter intoning, "A former First Lady at the center of a financial firestorm." The New York Times went bold and spare Melania. Trump signed trust using son's name, recording shows. Phone screens lit up like a runway at midnight, the clip replaying on a loop, the one sentence everyone could quote from memory. Headlines became sirens and the sirens wouldn't stop. The public split cleanly like glass under pressure. One side raged that Melania had been ruthless, that she had turned her son into a tool to shield wealth from scrutiny. Commentators called it a mother's calculation, not a mother's protection, and the phrase caught on. The other side pushed back with equal force, saying a mother had done what she had to do in the teeth of a political siege. Talk radio lines jammed with callers pleading she was protecting her family. What would you do? The argument wasn't polite, it was raw, personal, and relentless. In the middle of it all stood Barron, and a new label clamped onto him like a tag-living shield. The clip of his face cracking in the chamber became the country's screensaver, a portrait of a son pinned between loyalty and law. Editorials framed him as the symbol of a brutal collision family against justice, blood against the rules. Memes weren't jokes. They were knives slicing him into emblems and slogans. He was no longer the quiet heir. He was the case study, the cautionary tale, the center of the storm. Republicans stormed the airwaves to batter Jasmine Crockett, calling the hearing a smear campaign, a spectacle, a hit job on a young man. They shouted about decorum and decency, accusing her of dragging a son into political crossfire. But the video was unforgiving, and the audio was worse, and neither cared about talking points. Producers kept rolling the same sequence, the facts, the signature, the date, the tape, the line about the IRS. The attacks bounced and fell loud but weightless against the gravity of the evidence. When Jasmine finally stepped before the microphones, she didn't raise her voice or twist the knife. She spoke clearly, eyes steady as the boom mics leaned in and the world leaned closer. This is not just a financial investigation. This is a reminder that no one, not even the most powerful, is allowed to exploit their own children. The sentence landed with the finality of a gavel. Anchors paused, then read it back word for word, letting it ring. And for a moment the clamor thinned and the story simplified to a single brutal truth. The roar of headlines faded into a harsher sound silence where comfort used to be. In the days after the broadcast, Barron moved like a ghost through hallways that had memorized his footsteps. Paparazzi vans idled at every curb, long lenses peering through tinted glass like spears. When he slipped into an elevator, two neighbors stopped talking, mid-sentence, eyes dropping to their phones, as if a screen could hide their judgment. Security escorts walked a half step ahead, but nothing shielded him from the whispers that stuck to him like static. The world had seen him break, and now it wanted to see him break again. He tried the simple rituals that once kept him grounded: coffee at the corner place, a slow walk along the water, an unplanned stop at the gym. Each turned into a gauntlet. Baristas worked in brittle silence, handing over cups without meeting his eyes. A trainer who used to nod now glanced at the TV mounted above the treadmills. On the street, a group of tourists pretended to pose for a photo as a phone zoomed in on his face. Even the doorman, loyal, discreet, wore the strained smile of someone guarding a secret he wished he didn't know. Every door opened politely and closed colder. Online, the mockery had its own weather system. Clips looped with cruel captions. Someone slowed the audio of his gasp into a meme. Commentators sharpened their takes into arrows. The label Living Shield followed him from headline to hashtag, metastasizing into nicknames and punchlines. Direct messages pinged at all hours, some pitying, some poisonous, most from strangers confident they knew his soul from a 6-second video. He scrolled and stopped and scrolled again, trapped in the reflex to read the thing that hurt. The internet had turned his face into a stage prop, his name into a shortcut for a moral lesson nobody asked his permission to teach. Friends disappeared by degrees. A classmate texted that he needed to lay low for a bit because reporters were calling. A former teammate posted a neutral story about privacy and then muted him. Group chats that once filled with late-night jokes went quiet, replaced by the slow drip of people leaving without goodbye. One friend did call breathless, promising to swing by with takeout, then never arrived, never explained, never called again. The isolation was not theatrical. It was practical, efficient, antiseptic. People protected their own futures by stepping out of his frame. The message was simple. His presence had become expensive. He agreed to a single interview, not with a network, but with a small outlet that promised no ambushes and no edits. The room was plain, a wooden chair, a lamp too bright, a table that wobbled when he rested his elbows. He sat with his hands folded, making himself look still, even as one knee jittered under the desk. When the camera's tally light winked red, he spoke in a steady voice that surprised even him. "I have never asked to be protected that way. I want to live a normal life." He didn't elaborate, didn't slam anyone, didn't beg. He let the sentence hang there clean and bare, the kind a person can stand under without getting soaked. The public split along a wound line that ran through families, workplaces, and dinner tables. One side watched the interview and saw a young man chewed up by power he never chose a son, drafted into a battle plan he didn't write. They said he was collateral damage, that the tears in the chamber had been the only honest thing on TV all week. The other side heard his words and hardened, saying innocence without action is just cover, that silence is a shape taken by consent. Call-in shows lit up with strangers arguing about what a person owes to truth when that truth threatens his own blood. The debate wasn't abstract, it drew blood. Jasmine Crockett stepped before microphones only once, and when she did, she looked directly into the camera as if speaking to one household, one person. "You are young. You can choose to stand on the side of truth. Do not let silence turn you into an accomplice." No flourish, no taunt, just a rope thrown across a widening gap. The words threaded themselves through the noise, quiet enough to be heard, firm enough to hold weight. They didn't tell him what to do. They told him what choice would mean. In the hush that followed, he felt the room tilt from reaction to decision, like a corridor closing behind him and a door waiting ahead. By night, the city glowed outside his window, a grid of chances and traps. He stood with his phone in his hand, the screen reflecting a face he was still learning to recognize, part son, part symbol, part suspect, none of them whole. The interview clip replayed silently, his own mouth forming the words he'd already said. Somewhere below, a camera shutter cracked the air, and then another, and then the chorus faded. He drew a slow breath and stared into the dark glass. The path forward would not arrive as a rescue. It would arrive as a decision. The revelations inside the chamber had been volcanic, but what came after was the earthquake. Within weeks, congressional leaders announced that the scope of the hearings would expand. Every trust tied to the Trump family Delaware filings, overseas accounts, shell companies was pulled into the light. Subpoenas stacked high, and analysts told audiences that the investigation could sprawl for years. It was no longer one signature under fire. It was the architecture of wealth itself under siege. Headlines spoke of dynasty and downfall in the same breath. For the first time, the family name trembled, not from rumor, but from record. Melania slipped away from the blaze of attention with practiced precision. One day she was captured leaving a Manhattan townhouse, a scarf pulled across her face. The next she was gone. No interviews, no denials, no defenses, just absence. Commentators described it as a retreat, a strategy, or perhaps surrender. Networks replayed stock footage of her poised beside Donald Trump, in gilded halls, contrasting it with the void she now left behind. For weeks, her silence became its own kind of presence, a ghost that hovered over every panel discussion. In her absence, the scandal became heavier, not lighter. Barron, meanwhile, carried the weight of a new identity. Invitations dried up, cameras hunted him down, and speculation about his silence filled the gaps. When he finally stepped onto a small stage for his first public statement, the world froze. He gripped the podium with both hands, shoulders tense, but his voice carried clean. "I don't want my name to be a shield. I want to live as myself, not as anyone's shadow." The words rang through the hall, replayed across every network, embedded in every feed. They weren't polished. They were human. And in their simplicity, they cut sharper than any lawyer's defense. The chamber where Jasmine Crockett had carved her mark filled once more. And as the hearing drew to its final moments, she rose with the same composure that had anchored every storm. Her closing statement wasn't thunder, but steel. Justice is not only about punishment. Justice is the reminder that silence can be complicity. The line was short, devastating, and unforgettable. Senators scribbled notes, reporters underlined their pages, and viewers at home felt the chill of the truth. It was not about one family anymore. It was about the cost of silence in every corner of power. Outside the Capitol, the night erupted with chants and banners. Thousands gathered under the marble steps, candles flickering against the dark. They shouted in unison, voices rising over drums and megaphones. "No more shields. Justice first. The sound climbed the stone columns and spilled into the sky, demand too loud to ignore. Helicopters caught the crowd from above the lights of Washington, flickering against a sea of signs. The protest wasn't partisan, it was primal, a cry against being used against secrets wrapped in family names. As the broadcast closed, the camera panned upward, leaving the chants to echo. A narrator's voice delivered the line that framed the entire saga. The Oath of Melania is not just the story of a family. It is a lesson in the fragile line between love power and truth. The words lingered as the screen faded to black, leaving the nation, with questions still burning, but a warning seared into memory. The hearing had ended, but the reckoning had only just begun. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.